Welcome to Borrow Time. I'm Janine Lang, startup coach, author, and entrepreneur. Now, the purpose of this podcast series is to help startups take months, if not years, off of their startup journey. Now, knowing that we learn way more from our mistakes than our successes, the purpose is to interview successful business owners and have them share some of the nuggets that they needed to learn the hard way. And by sharing their wisdom with our audience, we're hoping that you're able to save valuable time back in your startup journey. Now, my guest today is Mike McCormick, who's the president and CEO of FSMC, which is 6 companies. Welcome, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Janine.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure on a Monday morning. Appreciate it. Great. So maybe you can start just by telling us a little bit. What is FSMC Companies?
So the parent company is Full Stack Marketing Consultants LLC, which is the one that we actually incorporated. But within that organization, there's a marketing agency that is primarily focused on large business, a consultancy practice that works with small businesses only, an accounting and bookkeeping firm that serves clients in the US and Mexico, a business telecom reseller company that serves clients in the US and Canada, an executive career coaching business that works primarily with displaced or other corporate executives looking for a new position, and a photo lab products import business that brings those products into countries that do not have true professional photo labs and as a support mechanism for the professional photographer. Other than
Wow.
that, I don't do anything.
I was going to say, it sounds like it keeps you just a little bit busy, Mike. And so I have to ask, obviously you started with probably one or two of those companies. How did you get your start?
The executive career coaching was actually the one that started. I wasn't happy in corporate America. I had risen to the CMO level. I enjoyed the work. The environment was horrible. The pay was exceptional. I'm not going to squawk about that, but it was the only good thing. So when you look at it, if the only reason you're going to work is for the money, then you're not going to be happy. I wasn't
No.
happy. I was in the position to have the capability of resigning because I wasn't living at the level of my pay. I resigned and I started my first company about 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. And so what was that? It sounds like you were more driven to escape an environment that you weren't passionate about, that was meaningful. And so how did you get your start though?
When I basically told the president of the company I was working with as a CMO that I'd had enough, uh, let's just say it was a little more direct than that, but I'll leave it at I'd had enough. And he tried to offer me more money. And well, money was never the issue. And when I told him no, he said, well, in that case, when will you be leaving? And I looked at my watch and I said it'd take about 30 minutes for me to pack up my office. And I did. And as I was sitting at home, I hadn't decided if I would go into business of my own or, go back into corporate America, just somewhere else. And I needed to get a job. Now, I had been on LinkedIn for many, many years at that point in time. I was there after in their second year of existence, so there weren't too many people on LinkedIn. But I said, well, I got to look for a job, and I saw a promo within LinkedIn and other places that said free webinar, learn how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. And this was primarily for job seekers. They weren't trying to do it for anybody else.
Right.
Well, okay. I attended the webinar. And what did I learn from it? Well, I pretty much knew how to do everything that they were speaking about.
Sure. Yep.
And I ultimately said, I can do it better than they can. So, so what I did ultimately was I tested on my own what they had said and other areas by doing a little bit of experimentation. found
Right.
out that it would indeed work as I had set it up. And then I started doing webinars and I started getting clients. So
Yes.
basically, I believed that I could do it better than they could, and it proved to be correct and wound up having a pretty successful first year. It was in the six figures, which isn't too bad just doing
Wow.
LinkedIn profiles and coaching these executives on how to use LinkedIn and other tools to get in front of the hiring managers. Nobody can guarantee you a job, and if they do, run the other way. But I could
Right.
definitely help them get in front of the people that they needed to be in front of.
Right. So it sounds like you were using your marketing expertise that you'd learned in your corporate career. Is that fair?
It was, and I also have a technical background. So at the time, if somebody said SEO, it really had no meaning. And within LinkedIn, there's no way you could do anything on the backside. You technically couldn't get in there and alter what they were doing. But by knowing where to place keywords and where to place phrases on the profile itself, it's what today would be commonly known as on-page SEO. Well, by reverse engineering to the best you can how Google would rank the profile, that's how you got it to show up on page one. Never guaranteed it would be the first spot on page one, but it was on
Right.
page one and pretty much near the top somewhere.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And a six-figure salary out of the experience in year one, that's pretty incredible success.
Yeah, my only expense was paying for the webinar software and the internet. Everything
Yeah.
else was just my time.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So you had some early wins, which is great, and probably you had some tough challenges along the way as well. So, what would you say stands out as one of the biggest challenges that really maybe sets you back from a timing perspective?
It wasn't necessarily a challenge, it was just foolishness. Uh, I started the bookkeeping business, the accounting business, and it was initially a hobby, not so much for me. I had always been able to do my own bookkeeping and accounting and file the taxes. I understood how to do all of that. But I had some friends that said, well, could you do our books for us? One of them is in a franchise restaurant, another one's in home construction. And so, yeah, I can do yours. But it was a hobby. I wasn't trying to make
Right,
any money off of it, really. It was spending money, is what I was getting.
right,
And so it evolved with me working with three friends that needed bookkeeping service. I didn't make any effort whatsoever to expand. I just sort of sat there and let it go.
right,
Well, at my age now, I have to face the fact that I'm not going to be here forever, and I have to have a succession plan, which I had an illness earlier on. I actually had severe COVID. My succession plan at that time was we'll get to it later. Well, suddenly later was immediately, and I didn't have anything. So now that I've started to plan, I said, well, what businesses could my family or my son take over that
right.
wouldn't require significant knowledge of the industry, just had to own and operate the business. And the bookkeeping business was one of them.
Mm,
So I made the effort. And people say, well, how did you grow so quickly? My first comment is, well, I always knew how to market. I just didn't. And
right,
so once I started to do it, the business kept growing and growing and growing. And we wound up with 46 clients at the end of the year. We did 90 tax returns so far this year. I just signed up three people just last week. And I have 18 people that actually do the majority of the work. It's not me. So, but then so what did it cost me?
right.
Well, in time, by not marketing the business, it cost me about 3 years of revenue.
Sure.
And and then when you look at the revenue, seeing as it's much higher than what it was when it was a hobby,
Right,
I that was a lot of money that I had the opportunity to make that wasn't going to cost me any more time or effort on my side.
right.
So, pretty much a foolish endeavor from somebody who should have known better.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, I think that happens quite often. I hear stories where an opportunity simply lands on your lap. Sometimes we don't even have to go out and find these things. And it's easy to look that gift horse in the mouth and not realize what we have in terms of an opportunity. So, a couple of clients, it obviously didn't seem like a focused business, but obviously you stepped up, and now we're seeing the returns as a result.
Yeah, it's doing very well. And what did I learn from the mistake? And I
Yeah,
would tell everybody is that a business can be a hobby, but a hobby can't be a business. So, you got if you're in business, then you should have the intent of making money. Have to
sure.
make millions of dollars, but in a hobby you don't typically care. But in a business you have to care about it, and that should be one of your focus areas is that you
Yeah.
want to have a successful business. And if you're not going to have a successful business, go play golf, go to the beach, go do something that's a lot more fun, and leave that to somebody else. You have to have the business for the intent of the business.
Exactly. And I love what you said at the beginning. You shouldn't be in it for the money alone. It's like that corporate job that you have. If the only thing getting you out of bed in the morning is a paycheck, that's not very motivating at the end of the day.
No, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, and they're saying, you should have a passion and a focus.
Yep.
Uh, when you look at, they've interviewed Warren Buffett a number of times, and he says, what is your biggest investment, that you would recommend in any business? And he says, yourself.
Yes.
Invest in yourself. But he says the second part is, how do you become successful? You focus. Again, it's not a game. It's, there are certain things that you can do and not do,
Right.
and treat it with the respect and focus that it needs. Because ultimately, if you're in business, the idea is that you're going to create enough revenue and profitability to support your family, to
Yes.
support other things that you might want to do. It's not just to work. I mean, if that's the case, if you
Yeah.
eventually get to the position where you don't care anymore, that's great. But in the beginning, yeah, you need to make money.
Yeah. And you sort of hinted at a little bit, but how much of the business and growing that business is about leaving that legacy?
Well, in my case, it's all of it because I'm at the age now where, I had the big risk of dying 3 different times when I had COVID, but I managed to escape that. But I'm at the age now where the road in front of me is much shorter than the road behind, and I need to be able to leave something, for a continuation for my son, for my family. And by saying that, the one thing is, and just as a recommendation, I know some business owners would agree with me, he's going to have to buy it from me. I'm not going to give it to him
I
because
love
if he
that.
has some skin in the game, then he's going to treat it with more importance. But he does want to eventually own and function in the areas where he has a skill set. And so we've been in a constant process of redoing the business model to make it applicable more to his skills versus mine.
Yeah, you're already working on that succession plan and making that happen for sure, for sure. So lots of lessons, I'm sure, that you've learned along the way. What else did it cost you, would you say?
Uh, well, it cost me a marriage. Another recommendation is that as important as your business is, it's not as important as your family. You have to learn how to delegate. You have to learn how to make good business decisions. But if you're married to your job, then the other side's going to suffer. It has to be a balance. And I'll be honest with you, most small business people realize how difficult it is in the beginning, and they're investing a significant amount of time. But then when they get to the point where they could delegate, they just don't do it. They think that, oh no, it has to be me doing everything. And then you have to step back and look and say, what is all of this costing me? Because now it gets back to thinking, now it sounds like you're only doing it for the money. And that
Absolutely.
just doesn't work.
No, no, and thank you for sharing that personal personal story about yourself, Mike. We appreciate it. And so often, as you say, startups just throw themselves in. And at the beginning, maybe you need to be so immersed to be able to create that foundation. But when is that enough? And as you say, learning that tough lesson about delegating will start to free yourself up. I just hear so often that startups never take vacation, they never get a break. But certainly making sure that the other priorities in your life are taken care of, because if everything else is suffering around you, that's not sustainable, right?
It's not, and an example of, taking, never taking time off. That wasn't true. I took time off. And I was on a cruise and I had my laptop and I was working about 5 hours a day. So, so
That's
it
a
wasn't
compromise.
really a vacation.
No, no, exactly. So being like completely present for your family and on vacation or immersed into the business, but not halfway pregnant, I think is that terrible expression. So
Yeah.
yes, yeah, exactly. So some tough lessons for sure. What would you say is one of your biggest successes?
I'm gonna go back to what I talked about with that LinkedIn profile business. Once I saw everything that they were doing, and I was able to say yes, I can do it better. But there's also some downstream successes that resulted from just doing that part of it. Uh, I One of my clients uh, was was somebody that I had worked with, and he was out of work. And I said I helped him. I didn't do it in its entirety for him, but I helped him uh, to get a job. And what did he do? He turned around and hired me. He became the CMO of one of the largest nonprofits in the United States. It's well known.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and when he filled the position as CMO, he hired me as vice president of marketing. But interestingly enough, I was still a contractor because I said I'm never going to work for anybody again. Now, very few people knew that I wasn't an employee, but here I am, the VP of marketing for a major nonprofit, and and that was sort of happy. We did such a great job that they wanted to reduce labor cost, and they booted both of us out about 18 months after we started. We had done extremely well. Oh, so now we're back at step one again. So I'm assisting him again because I'm going, I don't really want to work. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm happy with it.
Sure. Yep.
And he became president of a major electronics retailer, and then he hired me as a chief marketing officer. So
Wow.
I it sounds like a joke, but I'm not kidding when I say that I made millions of dollars from LinkedIn. Maybe not directly, but
Yeah.
that just shows how you can take an idea and conceptually it goes beyond your expectations and does things that you had no idea that it would do. And in both of those cases, senior executive positions, I was not an employee.
For sure. So obviously LinkedIn opened a tremendous door for you, but it sounds like the relationships really contributed to your success. Is that a fair assessment?
They did. And an example I have from that, and it's true to this day, is, and I always joke around that when I first started the marketing company, I really had two requirements of any prospective client. One would be that they had the capability of paying me. And the
Mhm.
other requirement is that they had, or the other concept is they had a pulse. And I used to joke say the pulse was optional, uh, but
Amy.
but the ability to pay me wasn't. So, but having said that, uh, as I expanded that marketing business, and it's not that way anymore. We're very successful, but we're also very expensive. And I only accept clients in that company through a referral from a current or past client, or we have done an RFP. In other words, we're bidding on the work. And the reason being is that, we just, in that company, the tire kickers were not beneficial to us. We had certain criteria of revenues and ad spends, and it just made it much better. Now, I would never recommend to any business that you start that way because if you do, you're going to starve to death. But it does show that the relationships ultimately, if they're strong enough, are going to pay off. and that's indeed what happened in this case.
Yeah, I love that lesson because sometimes, as you say, startups feel like they have to give their services away, and I get it, right? We're hungry to get that first client under our belt and to start to make a name for ourselves. But I know so many stories where owners had to fire some clients. Now you can be what your strategy is, being selective and making sure that you're pricing your services appropriately to attract the right type of clientele. But a number of startups had to learn the hard way and just blow up their business and start over if they found that they really were not attracting that right client. So
Exactly. And, having been a CMO of a major company, I could sit at those tables. I could work with those people. Using the example of my son, he can't. He doesn't have that experience level. That goes back to the, succession planning. But part of what happened out of all that is when I got sick, I couldn't work for almost 21 months. And I released all of my clients from their contracts. I mean, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't speak, couldn't do a thing. But once I got better and I said, well, I can come back, I said, well, I can only come back partially. I cannot come back to do what I did before. And almost to a client, they said, whatever you can do is good. And I said, well, aren't you happy with the people we helped you find? We are, but we'd still like you to be involved. So my business actually recovered and is now bigger than what it was before I had COVID.
oh, that's
So
tremendous. Well, I'm so
all
sorry.
because of the relationships.
Yes, for sure. Well, I'm so sorry to hear about the illness, but the fact that your client stood by you is a real testimony to the strength of the relationships that you've developed over the years.
Yep. I say my success is really twofold. My team members, who do an exceptional job, and their success leads to my success, and my clients. We're producing the success that they want, so they're willing to stay with us. The least important person in that whole cog is me. It's everybody else that's involved in it. So I may be the leader, I may be the person that's is speaking to all of these senior executives, but at the end of the day, I can't do all of the work that would be required. I wouldn't want to do all of the work, and without those relationships, the business would have been stagnant.
Exactly. And you can't run six companies being hands-on in all of them. And yes, absolutely. You've learned to delegate then. Yeah, exactly. So obviously that'll be a tremendous satisfaction being able to hand down that business to your son and know that he can take over the reins one day. And any final messages to our startups? Any words of advice?
Uh, I think we sort of touched on it, but find something that just goes beyond interest. It needs to be a real passion. You have to want to do it. And using myself as an example, I don't have to work anymore, but I still want to. And that's because I have a passion for what I do, for helping the small business person in the areas that we work in there, helping the larger companies make money, because again, that's the primary goal in that company. Working with executives who are facing job challenges, helping the professional photographers. At the end of the day, it really comes down to I'm trying to help people now because I have the ability, the time, and the financial capabilities to do that. Uh, have a focus. Don't go into it and to your point, I couldn't run six businesses at once. I have good staff that do it. I delegate it out. But if I didn't have the focus in the beginning, then even when I added the second business, it wouldn't have worked. You
Exactly.
have to believe that you can build a better mousetrap.
For
There's
sure.
very few things, excuse me, that are entirely new.
Yeah.
Uh, so you just have to do it better. And then understand that not everything that you do is going to work. Yeah, I mean, trust me, you have to use and trust the data, but you
Yeah.
also have to test alternatives. You have to do A/B testing, multivariate testing, and that's going to be different from the data that you were looking at. But once the
Yeah.
new data is in, I have a hard and fast rule: fail fast. don't fall into the trap of believing that throwing more money at the problem is going to
Yes.
resolve it, because it's not. All you're going to do is you're going to spend more money, and financially you'll be in worse shape. So, it may be a great idea on paper. Maybe the data led you to believe that that was going to work, but especially if you're dealing with consumers, they're fickle. And no matter what you think, a lot of them change their minds like people change their clothes. And if
Yes.
you're not responsive to it and you just keep saying, well, it's going to work and I didn't invest enough. Well, that's not the case. Listen to what the data tells you. Listen to what the customers are telling you. If they're not interested, it doesn't make any difference how much you spend on it. They're still not going to be interested. So fail fast.
I love
Oh,
I love that. Try different, don't be afraid to try different things, but measure what you're doing. And I love that suggestion. Do the A/B testing, right? You don't know what's going to work, what messaging is going to resonate until you try, but measure the results and talk to the clients so you're getting that feedback.
exactly. Every business owner or leader has had failures. If they're not, they haven't been in business. They're probably not even alive. Uh, don't ignore the failures. Learn from them, because that's the idea behind it. If you stay entirely in the safe zone, at some point you reach those thresholds that your business just won't grow beyond. So you do have to introduce new concepts, new products, new services. I mean, they can't be so far detached from your core business that it's like having another business, but you may have to do some adaptation. And if you look at the current environment, especially in the restaurant industry, all of these major companies that are closing down restaurants because they have
Mm,
not done anything in 25 years, and the their customer base or clientele has changed. The people that are alive, the younger people that are alive now are not the same people that were young and alive 25 and 30 years ago. They have different tastes. They have different desires. And if you're not addressing them, they'll go wherever they can get what they want. They made those big mistakes. So learn from looking at the larger companies that are making the same mistakes that the smaller ones do, except when you're dealing with a big company, the boat isn't very mobile. It might take, weeks or months to change direction. But if it's your own business, you can change direction pretty quickly.
for sure. So what you're describing really is that that need for focus, but also flexibility, making sure that you're adapting. And if you're listening to customers and have those channels of getting that feedback, then you should be adapting your business. Maintaining the status quo for 10, 15, 20 years, that's just not realistic.
No, and you made the point there. Ask them.
Yes.
Again, their viewpoints may change. Your clientele may change. I mean, I've worked with a lot of startups. When I ask them, so what is your target audience? And they say everybody. Well, good luck. No, it's not everybody, in
No.
spite of what you think. And if you don't have a product or service that is so unique that it's never been around before, because in those cases it typically those do take off because it's something that nobody's had before. But other than that, you can't just assume that because your idea looks good is that it's going to work, because it may or may not. But in any case, you just rely on the data, make the proper business decisions, which leads to another part is, you need to have the correct organizational type for your business.
Right.
Are you going to be a sole proprietor, a partnership, single member LLC, multi-member LLC, C corporation?
Right.
They're all different, and in most cases, especially if you have more than one business, but even with one, the LLC is the best alternative because it gives you some liability protections. It gives you the ability to truly have that separate from from your personal life, unlike a sole proprietor who's,
Right.
filing different taxes. So it does make a difference. And of course, it depends on the country because our
Right.
accounting and bookkeeping firm also offers organizational services in both the United States and Mexico. I can assure you there's a significant difference as to
Sure.
how you would want to organize a business based on the tax laws and the regulations in each particular country.
That
Uh,
makes sense to consider the jurisdiction for sure. And you
uh,
probably had to change your structure over time when you were one company versus now when you're six. Is that fair?
we did. Originally, I had six separate LLCs, and I went, "Why?
Oh my
I should
goodness.
I should know better." So we ultimately the LLCs sold the corporation to the
Right.
main company, and now we operate them as DBAs. So I have one company with, five other DBAs under it, but they're all owned by the same company. One, it makes my tax filings much more streamlined. The bookkeeping, while we keep each company separately, the consolidated reports are ultimately what we use to determine if the business is successful or where we're having problems, rather than having like six different children that are
Yes.
going to six different schools in six different states. Just doesn't, it's not functionally
No,
the best way of doing it. um
no, for sure. So again, that need to be flexible and adapt when something's not working any longer.
yep, absolutely. And and we mentioned this one before, but startup is going to require an enormous amount of work in the beginning. It really is.
Yes.
uh but as soon as you can, start to delegate, um because you need to have a life too. And there are two well-known statements from Jack Welch, who was the CEO of General Electric way back when. His first comment was that if he was the smartest person in the world in the room, GE was in trouble. So that
Right.
made no sense to him at all. He didn't want to be the smartest person in the room. He was the leader, and he needed to get the feedback to make those decisions.
Right.
His second statement, which is probably equally as important, he said, when you have a job opening, hire the best person available at the time.
Yes.
And again, make sure they're smarter than you. That would also tie into it. But he says, and once
Yep.
you've hired them, and get out of their way and let them do their job. Because if you micromanage, you can't, especially if you're a leader and you have multiple companies. If you're trying to micromanage, then you can't help anybody. You're just, you're doing too much. You have to trust that your business decisions and your delegation uh,
Yes.
is the best for the company. That doesn't mean you ignore it. There's a phrase, inspect what you expect. Absolutely. You check on the work, you check on the people, you check on the projects, but that's at a high level. You're not
Yes.
getting involved in the minutia, because as soon
Yep.
as you do, you're not growing your business anymore. I mean, you become the person that's doing the work. And if that's the case, why did you hire the other person?
Exactly. I love that advice because so often we hear the B players tend to hire the C players because it makes them feel better. Instead, the B players really should be hiring the A players because you want capable people, right? It makes your life easier. So being able to identify that talent and be able to attract that is so key in growing a business, isn't it?
It is. And for those, even though the book is old, the book Good to Great talks about a couple things with their staffing. First of all, is the right person on the bus? That's the
Right.
first one. So in other words, do they fit into the company? But the second criteria is, are they in the right seat? So they may be a great employee, but did you put them into a situation where that's not truly the skill set that they're going to excel in? So you're trying to put a square peg into a round hole, and they may be great on the bus, but they're not in the right seat. So make sure that you align their skill set and their desires and their focus with the work that you need to have done. Don't try to
Yeah.
make them do something that isn't going to fit, because they're not going to be happy. They'll produce substandard work compared to somebody who's an expert in that area. So why do that to yourself?
Yeah. I
It's
love
it's
that
just
advice.
it's important. It's you have to conceptually, especially as a leader. And the other thing I say, leaders are not managers. Managers can be leaders, but leaders are not managers. You're not doing the minutia work. My role in the companies ultimately other than my very specific jobs, is to help my teams be successful, to remove obstacles that they may not be able to accomplish on their own. But again, it's not to do their job, it's to help them, because the more successful they are, the more successful I am.
Exactly. I love that. And you picked probably one of my favorite business books, Jim Collins, Good to Great, because he talks about that level 5 leadership, which is really one of the qualities that I love most about that description from Jim Collins is that humility that a leader should have, right? Because if you're humble, you're going to be curious, you're going to be willing to have other people's perspectives heard. You don't just need to delegate down and hear your own voice. You can let the good talented people that you've hired run the business for you with just that oversight. So
Yeah.
I love that.
I've had a couple suggestions where I've just sort of chuckled to myself, gee, I wish I'd thought of that. But I didn't. And to your point, you have to be willing to accept the feedback. I mean, again, as Jack Welch said, hire people smarter than you. Well, don't hire people smarter than you and then ignore what they're saying. That
Yes.
doesn't make any sense. So listen to them. Listen to the recommendation. Ultimately, you may be the final decision maker, but you're going to find that more often than not, they thought of something that didn't even enter your mind, and it's a positive thing. Or they're you have to also be open to taking the feedback when somebody offers something up and they said, We know what you're trying to do. That's
Yes.
not going to work. I don't know why you came up with that idea, but you need to get rid of it." So my team will give me that feedback. They'll ask me, was I stupid when I thought of it? Um, and
That's correct.
but that's okay. I mean, they're not being mean about it, but
Yes.
I don't want them to not feel that they can come and challenge my decisions. Now, ultimately, when I've made the final decision, it's no
Yes.
longer up for debate. But while we're discussing what should be going on, I expect them to tell me that I'm crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's a gift, right, Mike? Because if they just blindly followed, knowing that it was not going to result in a good outcome, then that's not helping the business ultimately. So that's a gift, and obviously a testament again to the relationship that you have with staff, which is coming back to that theme again. It's really so much about the people, right? How we influence, how we treat other people, and how that comes back to you.
It is, and it's ultimately, I think you find that I tell you, be careful what you wish for, because when I started to add these businesses, in the back of your mind, it's going to be a little bit more work, but you're thinking that because you have one that's doing really well, the second one will be okay. Third one, no, it's still, they're all starting. They're all babies. They have to learn how to crawl before they walk and walk before they run. And in most cases, you have to have the realistic understanding that it's, every time you add one or the bigger your business gets, it doesn't make it easier. You
Right.
might have a different role, but the bigger the business is, the more responsibility and accountability is there. And, if you think that the other part of you think, well, I'll just delegate it all, I'm not going to worry about it. Well, what happens when you find out that, what's being done wasn't what you expected, but you didn't bother to look? The other piece is you can't accept substandard performance, because if you ignore that performance, then the team member feels that that's okay. So don't be afraid to challenge them and say, this is what you should be doing. This is the results you're having. That's not working out. Um,
For
but
sure.
some people are afraid to do that. And in some cases, you may have to terminate somebody. That ultimately may come down to that. And if you are terminating them on their schedule versus yours, that's not a good idea. Some
Right.
people are kept much longer than they need to be kept because oh, I can't get rid of them. I have nobody to replace them. And that leads to succession planning within the company. Are you out recruiting all the time, even if you don't have an opening? I spent
Right.
many years in retail, and the managers would leave and they'd say, well, hope this doesn't impact you a lot. They're just trying to be ugly because their sales weren't up. My comment is I would take out this little index that I had. I said, well, I got about 10 people that I can call right now. And I said, I'll have you replaced by tomorrow morning.
Yes,
So it's,
exactly.
you have to realize what your responsibility is and do it. And again, if
For
you're in the retail environment in a field supervisory level, you're responsible for all those stores and the personnel. And the executive leadership doesn't want to hear it when well, I had a manager quit. They're not going to tell you to go ahead and close the store until you get another one. That's
sure.
not an option.
No,
So
exactly.
learning, and that was another mistake I made in the beginning. I didn't try to recruit until I needed it. And I realized that, well, if I recruit before I need it, maybe they're not all available, but somebody probably is.
For sure. I love that advice because it goes back to what you said earlier about failing fast. If you've made a bad hire, I see too many owners, especially when they're growing the business, they put so much trust and they make that hire. And if there isn't that fit, because as you say, Mike, if somebody's working in a way that's not aligned with your vision, then you have to pull in the reins again. And I too often see owners, especially in those first few years, reluctant to pull in those reins and just not admitting if there's been a bad hire. And so just sever the ties. But as you say, to keep the wheels on the bus, you got to make sure, and the bus moving, you got to
Mhm.
make sure that you've got a pipeline of good talent in the wings. Again, that goes back to relationships, right? And
It
fostering
it
them.
does. I've taught a lot of people in the retail side of the world that, had achieved a supervisory level that, yeah, this is the first thing you have to, well, why would I want to recruit? I don't have any openings. You're going to, nah, no, you're going to, trust me. And when you have one, instead of being reactive, you're proactive. You already know what you're going to do, versus going, oh my gosh, now what? Because
For sure.
again, I had one person that was, from a disciplinary point, was so bad that he couldn't even stay the rest of that day. That store was in Miami. I was in Tampa. I wound up spending 2 weeks in that store while I was getting somebody because he wasn't going to run the business. Well, I mean, he was costing me money. Did I enjoy being there for 2 weeks, working every day in the store, being away from my family? Absolutely not. But it was the right decision in order
Right.
to keep the business moving, in order to keep the wheels on the bus turning.
For sure. So you really need to know when to step in and really manage things. And you've obviously had to deal with some very tough situations. And the people side can be really a challenge, your greatest gift. Because what you're really describing is Mike, having a growth mindset that you're thinking when this business is bigger and how are we going to grow. Obviously, that means bringing some people in. So if you're not in a panic to have to hire somebody because you've been developing and building this pipeline in the wings, then it makes that decision probably a lot easier.
Exactly. I'd
Yeah,
also add that, you don't have to be the expert in everything, but, and I'm not saying about a large corporate entity, but if you have a small business or a couple small businesses, whatever it happens to be, you should know how to do everything that needs to be done within that organization. Doesn't mean you're going to do it. The example I know how to code. I could build a website. It might take me 2 weeks, but if I pulled one of my team members up, they could do it in 4 hours. The fact that I know how to do it means that I just understand what would be going on. But again, I don't have the same level of skill set that they do, but understanding it, so every aspect, you should at least, have an awareness of it. And in small business, one of the biggest challenges is that when they get their financial reports, they put them in the drawer. Yeah, they look at a P&L and a balance sheet and go, yeah, that's nice. And they need to have a basic understanding of financials. It's not their skill set, I mean, and my favorite industry is healthcare and it's doctors. I can assure you that of all of the doctors that I've ever spoken to, every one of them is a good practitioner. They're skilled in patient care. They're skilled in whatever their specialty is in medicine. I've met very, very few that also went to business school. Most of them did not. And sometimes you look at like, why are you thinking that? But again, that's not their skill set either.
for
So
sure. I love what you're saying because, and I don't know if you're aware, CEO Excellence or CEO Mindset, CEO Excellence, I think is the name of the book. McKinsey Partners did a lot of research to truly discover what makes CEOs, really great CEOs, great and sets them apart from the rest. And to the great point that you're saying, Mike, in that top job, you're accountable for absolutely everything. So my words, not theirs, but you need to be an inch deep in every single aspect of your business. You need to be a mile deep in certain areas, like,
Mm.
as you say, marketing. And I love your comment because if you're not even an inch deep on the finances and you're slipping that P&L in the drawer and you really don't want to have that knowledge, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And there's so many business owners that were taken advantage of. You hear horror stories where they lost that business because they didn't have an inch deep in financial acumen to be able to read the writing on the wall or understand if their company was, there was an embezzlement issue here. So they've really gotten themselves in trouble. So I think that research that McKinsey did revealed that they're solid or exemplary in a few areas, but they're at least solid in every other area of the business. You almost need to be that generalist to be good at that top job, right?
You do, and I actually have an example from a physician. It was interesting that um, he had come to me and said, "You need to help me analyze my business. What am I doing well? What am I not?" And he had a person, a coder. Now, obviously, insurance coding is important if you're in the healthcare field, and he was paying her $90,000 a year. You could hire a coder for about 50. So I
Mm,
said, "What's this all about?" And I said, "You realize you could hire a coder and, pay $40,000 less." His comment back to me, other than the fact that he wanted to keep this person, she was very important to him,
right.
was that, "Well, what difference does it make? I'm not paying for it." And I went, "Excuse me?" Now, technically, from a legal standpoint, if it was a C corporation, no, you're
Yes.
not. But he was an LLC. So,
Yes.
yes, he was paying for it directly out of his own pocket. And he didn't
Yes.
understand that. And he said, but I said, you have two choices. You cut her pay or you give her more responsibility. So he made her not only the office manager, but he
Right.
also put her having oversight over the coders. And then he could justify her $90,000 salary. And then he went and found a $50,000 coder. So
There,
ultimately, he took that person's job and expanded it, justified what she was being paid. And, so everybody worked out. But when he said that he wasn't paying for it, excuse me? Well, who do you think is?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that really goes back to having that right mindset again, right? That we were talking about earlier. If you're not thinking about your pockets as an entrepreneur, again, that's not going to be sustainable.
No, especially if they're empty, right? You know,
That's
you might only be able to jiggle coins together, and that's okay. You might be in a whole lot of paper in there, but if it's empty, you're in trouble.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's wonderful. Well, thank you. There was so much richness and so many lessons in what you just shared. I know the audience will be thrilled to have all of that value that you've imparted. And if they want additional information, how can they get a hold of you, Mike?
The easiest way to do it is info@digitalthatdelivers.com. That's the main company. That's an email address that gets forwarded to me, and I will see it. So it's info at, and then three words all combined, digitalthatdelivers.com. And people say, "Why'd you pick that?" I said, "That's the tagline for our business." I could have called it full stack marketing, but what do we actually do? We offer digital that delivers, and that's where the name came from. So there's a marketing tip for people. Just, think about how you can use that URL to promote your business. It's not just a name anymore.
I love that. And it obviously demonstrates that you deliver value. And that is absolutely what you've done in this podcast. I'm so grateful again. Thank you, Mike, for spending time with us this morning and sharing all of your words of wisdom and certainly sharing that mistake or opportunity and what that cost you, because there's so much value and opportunity for people to learn from the mistakes of others and fail fast is certainly one of the key takeaways that I got from this exercise. So thank you so much for the conversation this morning. And for our listeners out there, I believe Mike said himself, believe in yourself.
And thank you for having me.
Right? Thanks, Mike.